I had always thought our marriage was solid, the kind of bond that people envied, built on shared laughter, quiet understanding, and years of memories that stitched us together. Jessica and I had our routine, predictable but comforting. Weekend coffee runs, late-night movies, and the little inside jokes that made our home feel like ours alone. Yet, lately, I couldn't shake the sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. It wasn't a grand event, no screaming fights or dramatic betrayals that you'd notice from the outside. It was subtle the way Jessica's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, the small delays in answering texts, the faint tension that had begun to settle into the corners of our home. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, the anxiety of overthinking a marriage I loved deeply. But an unease had rooted itself inside me, gnawing quietly at my chest. The invitation to Mark's friend's party that weekend should have been a welcome distraction. I imagined the laughter, the chatter, and the warm glow of lights reflecting off glasses, conversations blending into a pleasant hum. Jessica looked beautiful that evening, in a soft green dress that highlighted the curve of her shoulders, hair cascading down her back in loose waves. I smiled, proud and content, but as soon as we entered the house, a subtle shift struck me. She moved differently, more hesitant, glancing around the room as though expecting someone, or perhaps avoiding someone. The warmth I had expected in our arrival was absent, replaced by a tension I couldn't ignore. Her hand brushed mine briefly, a gesture meant to anchor us, yet it felt fleeting, disconnected, as though she were holding herself back from me. As the evening unfolded, the subtle signs grew impossible to dismiss. Jessica's laughter was slightly delayed, forced at times, and her phone seemed to have become a constant appendage, her thumb flying across the screen whenever she thought I wasn't looking. I noticed the way her eyes flickered toward a corner of the room when certain friends approached, how she murmured under her breath, speaking in hushed tones, and immediately silenced herself whenever I drew near. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, yet I felt trapped between disbelief and dread. The guests were oblivious, caught in their conversations, but I could sense the tension threading through my wife like an invisible wire. I felt both confused and alarmed, unable to reconcile the woman in front of me with the wife I thought I knew so completely. It was then that Rachel appeared. Jessica's best friend had always been charming, open, the kind of person who could talk to anyone effortlessly. But tonight, her eyes held something sharper, urgent. She pulled me aside into a quiet hallway, the murmur of music and laughter behind us, creating a surreal backdrop for what was about to unfold. "Mark," she said, her voice low and steady, tinged with urgency, "there's something you need to know about Jessica." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity, freezing my stomach and tightening my chest. I blinked, unsure whether I had misheard or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Yet the look in Rachel's eyes was impossible to misread. Serious, sincere, and just slightly fearful. I followed her into a quieter corner, heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Her words were careful, cautious, but their meaning was clear. Something about Jessica had changed, something I had not seen, and it was time for me to pay attention. "I didn't want to say anything at the party, but I can't stay quiet anymore," she whispered. My mind raced, a dizzying mix of trust, fear, and disbelief battling for control. Had I really missed the signs? Was my wife hiding something from me? Something serious? The festive atmosphere of the party vanished, replaced by a crushing weight of uncertainty and the stark awareness that my world, at least the part I thought I understood, was not what it seemed. Rachel's words lingered in my mind as I returned to Jessica, who smiled at me with a brightness I could no longer fully trust. I felt a pang of sorrow, a sharp ache that something precious might be slipping through my fingers. Every gesture she made, every word she spoke, seemed layered with hidden meaning, and I could feel the tension threading through the room like a live wire. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but a part of me hesitated, fearing the confirmation of what Rachel had implied. The night stretched on, filled with laughter and conversation, yet every moment was tinged with dread, the subtle undercurrent of betrayal threatening to pull me under. By the time we left the party, my thoughts were racing, my mind unable to settle on anything but Rachel's warning and the uneasy feeling that my marriage was no longer the secure haven I had believed it to be. The warm glow of the streetlights felt cold against my skin as I drove us home, glancing at Jessica, searching for a hint, a clue, anything that could reassure me or confirm my worst fears. Something had changed, irrevocably, and I had no idea how much or how soon I would learn the truth. The morning after the party, I couldn't shake Rachel's words from my mind. Her warning had been delivered quietly, carefully, yet it felt like a hammer striking against the fragile certainty I had built around my marriage. Jessica moved around the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared coffee, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I tried to focus on the mundane tasks, pouring cream into my mug, buttering toast, but every glance at her betrayed something I could no longer ignore. There was a subtle shift in her tone, the faintest hesitation in her laughter, and the way her eyes darted to her phone, as if it were both a shield and a warning. Each detail made my stomach knot tighter, a gnawing anxiety that I could no longer dismiss as paranoia. Throughout the day, the unease grew like a shadow stretching across our home. Jessica answered texts with quick, almost imperceptible flinches, and I noticed little inconsistencies in her explanations for where she had been or what she had done. Questions I asked were met with deflection or a vague smile, her lips curling in a way that once felt playful but now felt evasive. I found myself replaying Rachel's words over and over. Something's not right. Pay attention. I couldn't help but feel both dread and betrayal at the notion that I might have been blind to the truth all along. Every small gesture, every subtle lie or half-truth now took on a weight that made my chest tighten. The foundation of my marriage, once seemingly solid, now felt like it was built on sand. By evening, the tension had seeped into every corner of the house. I noticed Jessica scrolling through her phone with a nervous intensity, her shoulders stiff, her eyes scanning the screen in secret. The simple domestic sounds of home, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the muted television felt almost oppressive, highlighting the distance that had crept between us. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but a part of me hesitated, uncertain of what her reaction might reveal. The stakes had suddenly become unclear. Trust, once effortless, now required careful navigation, and I felt like I was walking on a tightrope over an abyss I couldn't see. The strain began to manifest in subtle arguments, small sparks of tension that escalated more quickly than I expected. I would comment on something trivial, like leaving a dish in the sink or forgetting an appointment, and Jessica would respond defensively, her tone sharper than necessary. I realized that these were not isolated incidents, but symptoms of the deeper fissure that Rachel had warned me about. Every word, every glance, every half-smile carried layers of meaning I could no longer ignore. My mind raced with questions I didn't yet have answers for. Who was she hiding from? Was there someone else? Was our marriage built on a facade I had been blind to for years? I found myself replaying moments from the party, dissecting every gesture, every laugh, every whispered conversation I had witnessed but dismissed. I remembered the way Jessica's hand trembled slightly when a certain friend approached, the subtle tension in her shoulders, and the quick, secretive glances at her phone. Each detail now felt like a clue in a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. The dread of what I might discover was suffocating, yet I felt compelled to pay attention, to observe, and to understand. Rachel's words echoed constantly in my mind, like a warning siren. It's worse than you think. Don't ignore it. That night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the gnawing sense of betrayal. I thought about the life Jessica and I had built, the love and laughter, the intimacy that had once been effortless. Now, everything felt fragile, tainted by suspicion and fear. I wondered how much she had hidden from me, and whether the person she had confided in or perhaps deceived was still a threat to the trust we had painstakingly nurtured. Sleep was impossible, my mind a whirlwind of doubt, anger, and heartbreak, circling around a truth I wasn't ready to face but knew I could no longer ignore. By the time morning came, I had made a silent resolution. I could no longer let suspicion sit in the shadows. I had to discover the truth, no matter how painful. Rachel's words had opened a door I couldn't close, a door that led directly into the heart of my marriage, where deception and betrayal might be waiting. I felt the weight of impending confrontation pressing down on me, and though fear clawed at my chest, determination burned brighter. Something had changed, irrevocably, And I knew that the coming days would force revelations I might never have anticipated, but I had no choice but to face them. I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's warning, and by the following afternoon, my curiosity and dread had reached a point I could no longer ignore. I found myself sitting alone in our living room, Jessica's phone lying on the counter, her charging cable still plugged in. Every instinct in me screamed not to invade her privacy. Yet another part, the part that had been quietly gnawing at me for weeks, demanded that I see the truth for myself. My hands trembled as I picked up the device, feeling the familiar warmth of the screen against my fingers. It felt heavier than usual, as if it carried all the secrets she had kept hidden. The moment I unlocked it, my heart began to pound so hard I was sure it would shatter my ribs. At first, I found little that was alarming. Casual texts from friends, harmless banter, and the usual flurry of social media notifications. But as I dug deeper, my stomach dropped. I noticed a series of messages that had been deleted or carefully hidden in folders that Jessica had clearly thought I would never find. Names that should have been familiar suddenly appeared in contexts I couldn't ignore. There were conversations that hinted at secrecy, flirtation, and manipulation. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I scrolled through the exchanges, each new message hitting me like a punch to the gut. Every instinct I had about the subtle shifts in our marriage suddenly made sense. The signs I had dismissed as stress or distraction were actually cries for secrecy, evidence of betrayal I hadn't dared imagine. Then came the undeniable proof. Photos, messages, and even voice notes that left no room for misinterpretation. Jessica had been hiding an affair, subtle at first, growing bolder and more calculated with every exchange. The meticulous way she had covered her tracks, deleted texts, altered logs, cryptic explanations made my blood boil. The woman I had trusted, shared my life with, and believed, loved me unconditionally, had been leading a double life, right under my nose. I felt a surge of anger so sharp it made my head spin, mixed with a profound sense of heartbreak. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, every small ritual and private joke, now felt tainted by the knowledge that deception had threaded through it all. I sat back, hands clenching into fists, replaying every moment I had dismissed over the past few weeks. Her distant smile at the party, the quick glances at her phone, the subtle defensiveness, all of it had been a warning I had failed to heed. Waves of regret crashed over me. Had I been too trusting? Too naive? Could I have prevented this if I had noticed earlier? The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, crushing, suffocating. And yet beneath the grief was a spark of clarity. I needed to face this head-on, understand the full extent of the deception, and confront it before it went any further. The emotional fallout hit me in waves. First came disbelief, the kind that numbs your limbs and makes even familiar surroundings feel alien. Then came anger, sharp and red-hot, fueling a need for confrontation and accountability. Finally, heartbreak settled in, heavy and slow, wrapping around my chest like chains. I could barely breathe, yet I knew I had to process the truth fully before I could act. The house, once warm and safe, now felt cold and alien, the walls closing in with every thought of betrayal. I realized that trust, once unshakable, had been violated in ways that would take time to repair, or perhaps could never be repaired. I spent hours combing through her phone, cataloging evidence, trying to understand how long the affair had been going on, who was involved, and whether anyone else had known. The more I uncovered, the more precise the betrayal became, each detail adding fuel to the fire of shock and despair. Memories of the party returned with horrifying clarity. Her whispered laughter, the way she avoided certain people, the faint tension that had seemed inexplicable. Now every piece fit together, forming a damning mosaic of deception. The anger that had simmered in me finally boiled over. I wanted answers, confessions, closure, and I wanted them immediately. By late evening, I had made a decision. I could no longer pretend ignorance. I needed to confront Jessica, to force honesty, to understand why she had betrayed me so profoundly. Yet fear lingered, fear of her reaction, of what I might hear, and of the irreparable damage that could follow. I felt trapped between rage and grief, uncertainty and resolve. One thing was certain: the truth was out, and there was no going back. I would face the betrayal directly, even if it shattered the fragile remnants of trust we had left. The storm had arrived, and the calm before it was over. The next evening, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The tension had been building for days, a thick, suffocating presence that made every glance at Jessica feel like a risk. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had changed. Her face calm and composed, but I could see the subtle signs of unease flickering behind her eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear, anger, and sorrow, as I took a deep breath and approached her. "Jessica," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk. Now." She looked up, startled, her lips parting slightly as if to respond, but she said nothing. The silence between us was thick, almost tangible, and I felt the weight of everything that had been hidden pressing down on us both. I placed her phone on the table, sliding it gently toward her, and met her gaze with a mixture of grief and determination. "I know about the affair," I said, my voice low but firm. Her eyes widened for a brief moment, a flash of guilt and fear crossing her face before she masked it with composure. The air seemed to crackle with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. My chest tightened as I searched for any hint of denial, any fragment of truth she might offer. She remained silent for a moment, biting her lip, and the stillness was deafening. I could feel the anger rising, hot and consuming, but beneath it was the deep ache of heartbreak. The woman I had loved, trusted, and shared my life with had shattered that trust, and I needed to understand why. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "Mark, I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her tone a mixture of apology and desperation. She tried to explain, fumbling through half-truths and excuses, but the pain in her voice couldn't hide the betrayal. Every word she spoke seemed to confirm what I had already discovered, yet hearing it directly made it worse, sharper, more personal. I could feel my emotions teetering between rage and sorrow, my hands clenching at my sides, trembling with the intensity of it all. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand explanations that might never come. Yet beneath the chaos, a clarity emerged. I had to face the truth fully, no matter how devastating it was. Rachel's warning echoed in my mind again, a ghostly voice reminding me of what I had sensed but never fully acknowledged. She had been right, and now the consequences of Jessica's choices were laid bare before me. The betrayal wasn't just a series of secret messages or hidden meetings, it was a deliberate deception that had undermined the very foundation of our marriage. I felt the betrayal in my chest, sharp and suffocating, as though someone had carved a hollow where my trust had once resided. Every shared memory now carried a shadow. Every laugh, every tender moment tinged with doubt. The marriage I had believed was unshakable now felt like glass, fragile and irreparably cracked. I took a step closer, forcing myself to maintain composure despite the storm inside me. "I need to know the full truth, Jessica," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "I need to understand everything, because if we're going to move forward, or if we can move forward, I can't do it blind." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and for the first time, the weight of her actions seemed to fully hit her. She admitted more than I had anticipated, every detail unraveling the carefully constructed narrative she had maintained. I listened, heartbreaking, anger rising, grief and betrayal colliding in waves that left me breathless. I realized that confrontation was not a single moment, it was an unrelenting exposure to the reality of deceit, and it demanded all of my strength to endure. Hours passed as we sat together, the room heavy with silence, punctuated by confessions and sobs. The emotional intensity was exhausting, almost unbearable, yet necessary. I could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable, as the truth poured out and the tension reached its peak. For a fleeting moment, I glimpsed vulnerability, regret, and honesty in Jessica's eyes, and it was both painful and oddly relieving. The confrontation had forced us to the edge of our emotions, and now, standing on that precipice, I realized the final reckoning was inevitable. We could no longer hide behind pretense or silence. The full extent of betrayal had been revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the night ended, exhaustion and raw emotion left us trembling, the weight of reality pressing down on both of us. I had seen the betrayal fully, confronted the lies, and heard the confessions that had long been hidden. The climax of our emotional storm had arrived, leaving in its wake a tense, fragile quiet. And even as I felt the grief and anger course through me, I knew that the next step, the twist, the resolution, the ultimate reckoning was looming just ahead, and there would be no turning back from the truth we had finally faced together. The morning after the confrontation, the weight in my chest had not lifted, but a fierce determination had replaced the initial shock and heartbreak. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, reviewing everything I had discovered: the messages, the hidden meetings, the carefully disguised interactions that had nearly destroyed my sense of reality. Every detail screamed of betrayal, yet beneath the anger was a clarity I hadn't felt since Rachel first pulled me aside at the party. I had the power to confront this fully, to take control of the situation, and to decide the future of my marriage. I knew that ignoring it further would only allow the damage to fester, and I refused to let that happen. I confronted Jessica again, this time with a calmer but resolute tone, presenting all the evidence I had gathered. The room felt thick with tension as I laid it out. Screenshots, timelines, and every deceptive action meticulously documented. She glanced at the papers, her face pale, and I could see the fear of exposure in her eyes. For the first time, she did not attempt to defend herself with excuses or half-truths. The mask she had so carefully worn was gone, and in its place was raw, unvarnished honesty. The shock of her admission hit me like a wave, leaving me breathless, yet also confirming what I had feared for weeks. There was no room left for denial. The truth was finally undeniable. As the day went on, I realized that Rachel's role had been far more critical than I initially understood. She had not just been a friend giving me a warning, she had acted as an anchor, someone capable of seeing the subtle shifts and dangers in our marriage that I had been blind to. I reached out to her, explaining the full extent of what I had found, and her support was unwavering. Together, we devised a plan to confront the larger consequences, not just the emotional betrayal, but the potential ongoing harm to our trust, our family, and our lives. Rachel's insight proved invaluable, giving me the courage to face the situation with clarity, rather than the chaotic storm of anger and despair that had consumed me initially. The final twist came unexpectedly, a revelation that reshaped my understanding of the entire affair. As I questioned Jessica further, it emerged that the deception had not been entirely her own initiative. She had been manipulated and pressured by someone close to her, someone she feared exposing. This added layer of complexity twisted my emotions even further: anger at the betrayal, sorrow for her vulnerability, and determination to protect us both from external harm. The manipulator's identity, someone I had never suspected, brought a sharp, almost satisfying clarity to the chaos, and I knew that confronting them directly would be the next step. Karma, in a sense, was finally catching up, and I felt a rush of resolve surge through me. With evidence in hand and clarity in mind, I confronted the manipulator, carefully choosing words that left no room for denial or evasion. The shock on their face, the sudden panic, and the realization that their control had ended was almost surreal. They attempted excuses, but the proof was undeniable. In that moment, I felt a deep, visceral sense of justice, a long-awaited release of tension that had weighed on me for weeks. The betrayal, manipulation, and secrecy had been exposed, and the balance, finally, was restored. It was a moment of empowerment and vindication, one that I knew would remain etched in my memory forever. Returning home, I sat with Jessica, exhausted and emotionally raw, yet feeling a fragile sense of closure. We talked for hours, processing what had happened, the mistakes, the fear, and the deception. Tears flowed freely, but so did understanding and a tentative path forward. I realized that while our marriage might never be the same, the ordeal had forged a new foundation, one built on honesty, vigilance, and the recognition that trust must be actively maintained, not taken for granted. The intensity of heartbreak and anger had been tempered by clarity, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with a quiet calm. I reflected on the lessons learned. Betrayal can cut deep, leaving scars that may never fully fade. But courage, honesty, and action can prevent it from destroying everything. Rachel's warning had been the spark, my discovery, the ignition, and the confrontation, the fire that cleared the air. I realized that marriage, trust, and love are fragile, yet resilient, capable of surviving even the most profound deception when faced with clarity and decisive action. I looked at Jessica, her eyes filled with remorse and a tentative hope, and understood that the path forward would be difficult but possible. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been served. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again.